For more than 2 decades, one silent piece of evidence sat locked inside an evidence box, a single strand of hair, no suspects, no witnesses, no CCTV footage. The investigation into Neha's murder went cold, buried under unanswered questions and fading hope. But years later, when forensic science evolved, that forgotten strand revealed the truth. Hidden within its DNA was the identity of a man no one had ever suspected, a man who had quietly blended into society, believing his secret would stay buried forever. What began as a dead end would become one of the most remarkable breakthroughs in the case, and the key to finally bringing justice for Neha. Neha was 20 years old. She was full of life, energy, and dreams. She loved spending time with her friends, helping her younger siblings with their studies, and often spoke excitedly about the future she was building. She was studying at a local college, determined to make something meaningful out of her life. Her family remembers her as someone who brought warmth and laughter into their home. Every evening, her parents waited eagerly to hear her footsteps at the door, knowing she would come in smiling. But one ordinary evening changed everything. Neha finished her classes and started her usual journey home. It wasn't very late, and the route she took was the same one she had been using for months. Her friends saw her leave the college gates, and everything seemed normal. She never made it home that night. When her family realized she hadn't arrived on time, panic set in. They tried calling her phone again and again, but there was no response. At first, they hoped there might have been a delay or some misunderstanding, but as the hours passed, fear took over. They searched the nearby streets, checked bus stops, asked neighbors, and contacted her friends, but no one had seen her after she left college. The police were informed, and a missing persons case was registered. What followed were long, sleepless nights for Neha's family. Her parents waited by the phone, hoping for any news. Volunteers, friends, and officers searched parks, isolated roads, and empty buildings. Posters with her photo were put up across the area, but there were no leads. Neha had vanished without a trace. Several days later, their worst fears came true. Neha's body was found on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet, deserted area with overgrown bushes and very little foot traffic. The news shattered her family. Her father broke down on the spot. Her mother was inconsolable. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers gathered outside their home, mourning the loss of a young woman whose life had been stolen far too soon. For investigators, the case was challenging from the start. The crime scene offered almost nothing. There were no clear footprints, no usable fingerprints, and no CCTV cameras in the area. No one had witnessed anything unusual. It was as if Neha had disappeared into thin air, and then reappeared only after it was too late. The only piece of physical evidence collected was a single strand of hair. Investigators hoped it might lead to the killer, but the hair had no root attached. At that time, forensic technology could not analyze rootless hair to obtain DNA. Without a usable DNA sample, there was no way to identify who it belonged to. With no suspects, no eyewitnesses, and no technological tools to move forward, the case gradually grew cold. Files were stored away, evidence was sealed, and the investigation lost momentum. For Neha's family, however, time did not heal. Every day without answers was another day of pain. Her parents held on to her belongings. Her room remained untouched, and her absence was felt in every corner of their home. The disappearance and murder of Neha shook the entire community. People were frightened, angry, and heartbroken. A young woman with a bright future was gone, and no one knew who was responsible. It seemed like the truth would never come to light. After Neha's murder, time kept moving, but for her family, it stood still. Days turned into months, and months slowly became years. Every festival, every birthday, and every ordinary day reminded them of the empty space she had left behind. Her parents would often sit together looking at her photographs, replaying old memories, and wondering why justice hadn't arrived. The investigation had stalled. With no suspects, no eyewitnesses, and no DNA match, the case file was pushed to the back of the shelf. Detectives who had once worked tirelessly on Neha's case were reassigned to newer investigations. The posters that once carried her face faded in the sun and rain. News channels stopped reporting about it. The case became just another unsolved file among many. But inside a secure evidence locker, something remained. The single strand of hair collected from the crime scene. It was carefully sealed and labeled, stored away with the rest of the evidence. To most, it was just a small piece of material, but in reality that hair held a story. It carried information that science at the time simply wasn't advanced enough to read. For Neha's family, the years were filled with unanswered questions. Her mother would often visit the local police station, asking if there were any new developments. Each time she left with the same painful answer, "We're still waiting for a breakthrough." Her father grew quieter over the years, carrying the weight of his loss in silence. Friends and relatives tried to comfort them, but nothing could fill the emptiness. Despite the lack of progress, the evidence was never discarded. Investigators followed standard procedures, preserving every item collected from the scene. That small decision to keep everything safe would become crucial many years later. As technology advanced, so did forensic science. In labs across the world, scientists were developing new methods to analyze old evidence. One major breakthrough changed everything: the ability to extract nuclear DNA from rootless hair. In the past, forensic experts believed that without a hair root, no DNA could be obtained. But new techniques proved otherwise. Even in rootless hair shafts, tiny fragments of proteins and DNA could be recovered and analyzed using advanced methods. Years after Neha's murder, this technology became available in a few specialized labs. Detectives reviewing cold cases began identifying old evidence that could now be retested. Neha's case was among them. A new generation of investigators who grew up hearing about the power of forensic science decided to revisit her file. They carefully retrieved the hair sample from storage. Even after so many years, it had been preserved well. The officers knew this was their best, and possibly last, chance to find answers. The hair was sent to a highly specialized laboratory that had the equipment to perform the new DNA extraction method. It was a complex and time-consuming process, but it gave hope to everyone involved. For Neha's family, news that her case was being reopened after all these years brought a mix of emotions. Hope returned, but so did the pain of memories they had tried to live with. They had waited for so long, and now, for the first time in decades, there was a real possibility of discovering the truth. Time had passed, people had changed, but the evidence had remained exactly as it was. That single strand of hair, once seen as useless, now held the power to speak. It carried the hidden identity of the person who had taken Neha's life, and soon that voice would finally be heard. Months after the decision was made to retest the evidence, investigators and Neha's family entered a new phase, one filled with cautious hope. The single strand of hair had been sent to a specialized forensic laboratory known for handling difficult cold cases. This was not a quick process. It would take weeks of careful work, but for the first time in decades, science had the ability to unlock secrets that had once seemed lost forever. Inside the lab, experts began the delicate procedure. First, they cleaned the hair sample to remove any possible contaminants. Then, using advanced protein-based hair genotyping, they extracted nuclear DNA from the hair shaft, something that had been impossible back when the case first began. Step by step, they built a DNA profile, working with incredible precision. Any error could mean losing the only real piece of evidence they had. While the lab worked, the investigators back home prepared for what might come. They went through the old case files, re-examined timelines, and mapped out Neha's last known movements. Every location she visited on that day was studied again with fresh eyes. Streets had changed, buildings had been replaced, but the investigators recreated the route she took from her college to her home, minute by minute. Weeks later, on a quiet morning, the call came. The lead detective answered, knowing this was the moment everyone had been waiting for. On the other end of the line, the lab director spoke calmly, but the weight of his words was enormous. "We have a full DNA profile." The detective's heart raced. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for. After so many years, the hair had revealed its secret. A complete DNA profile had been created, strong enough to be entered into national databases for comparison. The profile was immediately uploaded to the National DNA Index System, which stores DNA records from convicted offenders across the country. If the killer had ever been arrested or convicted of another crime, the system would instantly find a match. Investigators watched and waited as the system processed the new profile. Minutes passed, but no direct match was found. It was a moment of mixed emotions. On one hand, they had finally unlocked the DNA. On the other hand, the killer's DNA wasn't in any database. It meant the person responsible had managed to stay away from law enforcement for all these years. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new phase. With no direct match, investigators turned to a newer and increasingly powerful technique: genetic genealogy. This method involves comparing the DNA profile to public ancestry databases to find distant relatives of the unknown suspect. From there, genealogists build complex family trees, working backward to find the person who fits both the genetic evidence and the crime timeline. Specialists joined the team, carefully studying the DNA results and searching for connections. One by one, they found distant relatives, cousins, great-aunts, second cousins twice removed. Using these small pieces, they started piecing together the suspect's family tree. This was slow, careful work. It wasn't like television, where results appear instantly. Every lead had to be verified. Every name had to be checked. Investigators and genealogists worked side by side, following the DNA trail across generations and regions. Weeks of analysis slowly began pointing toward one particular family line. It was a family with roots in a small town far from where Neha had lived. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. They were getting closer, closer than anyone had ever been. For the first time in over 20 years, there was real momentum. A case that had been frozen in time was finally moving forward. The DNA had spoken, and its voice was leading investigators toward the truth. The painstaking work of genetic genealogy had finally narrowed the search to one family line, but investigators still had a long way to go. They couldn't act hastily. Every step had to be precise. One wrong move could allow the perpetrator to vanish before justice could be served. Detectives began reaching out to willing family members for voluntary DNA samples, explaining that the investigation was part of a decades-old cold case. Many were shocked, some hesitant, but a few agreed to help, understanding that the truth was more important than fear or privacy. Each new sample allowed genealogists to refine the family tree, ruling out relatives and zeroing in on the unknown suspect. Weeks of careful analysis finally produced a promising lead. A man named Rajiv Malhotra, 55 years old, living in a quiet suburb far from Neha's hometown. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious about him. He had a steady job as a delivery driver, kept a neat home, and was known as polite but reserved. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would make anyone suspect he could be capable of something as horrific as what had happened to Neha. But the DNA didn't lie. Genetic genealogy strongly suggested he was the one who had left behind that single hair strand all those years ago. Investigators carefully gathered information on his movements in the 2000s, and crucially, in the year Neha disappeared. They confirmed he had been in the area, delivering goods to several stores and locations she might have passed. Everything matched the pattern they had meticulously reconstructed from decades-old records. The team then turned to a discreet but powerful technique called discarded DNA collection. They watched Rajiv, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample he had left in public. A coffee cup, a soda can, something innocuous. This was done without him knowing, so as not to tip him off or alert him to the investigation. After days of surveillance, the right moment came. Investigators retrieved a discarded cup and rushed it to the state lab. When the DNA was tested, the result was definitive. It matched the strand of hair found on Neha's body. The probability that it was someone else, 1 in trillions. The evidence was undeniable. For the first time in more than 20 years, the case had a name, a real person who could now be held accountable. The detectives knew the next steps had to be flawless. Arrest warrants and search warrants were meticulously prepared. The operation had to be precise, leaving no room for error. Neha's family, who had waited decades for answers, were finally told that there was movement, that someone had been identified. The emotions were overwhelming. Relief, fear, disbelief, but above all, hope. For years they had endured uncertainty and pain. Now they could finally imagine a future where justice was possible. The breakthrough wasn't just scientific, it was deeply human. Persistence, dedication, and the courage to revisit old evidence had brought clarity. What once seemed impossible was now within reach. The perpetrator, who had hidden behind a life of normalcy for decades, had been unmasked. The long path toward justice for Neha was about to enter its most critical phase. The detectives prepared themselves mentally and emotionally. They knew the coming days would be intense, but after 20 years of searching, they were ready to confront the man responsible for stealing a young life. The name, the face, the proof, everything was in place. Justice was no longer just a hope, it was imminent. The detectives had their suspect. Every piece of evidence meticulously gathered over decades now pointed to Rajiv Malhotra, but the arrest couldn't be rushed. After so many years, they knew the smallest mistake could allow him to slip away. Every plan had to be perfect. On a quiet morning, the arrest team assembled near his home. Tactical officers, local detectives, and FBI agents were all in position. The neighborhood was calm, unaware that a life-altering moment was about to unfold. At precisely the planned time, the detectives approached Rajiv's door and announced their presence with authority. When Rajiv opened the door, his face showed confusion, even annoyance at being disturbed so early. But that expression quickly turned to shock as Detective Ravi declared, "Rajiv Malhotra, you are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Neha Sharma." There was no resistance, no denial. In that moment, the decades of pain and waiting converged into a single reality. The man responsible was finally in custody. The investigation didn't stop at the arrest. Officers searched his home and vehicles with precision, collecting evidence to strengthen the case. Every item, every record, every detail was documented. Forensics teams meticulously combed through files, electronics, and personal belongings. Each piece of evidence added layers of certainty to the case, ensuring that justice would be built on unshakable proof. Meanwhile, Neha's family was informed. The call brought tears, relief, and an overwhelming sense of closure. For years they had lived in limbo, haunted by questions and uncertainty. Now for the first time there was a path forward, a chance for justice to be served. The emotions were raw and intense, a mixture of sorrow, relief, and the long-awaited hope of resolution. The trial that followed was a testament to the dedication of everyone involved. Prosecutors presented the decades of evidence, from the DNA strand that first connected Rajiv to Neha, to the meticulous timeline showing his movements on the day she disappeared. Witnesses, co-workers, and experts testified, each account reinforcing the undeniable truth. Rajiv's defense tried to challenge the evidence, claiming contamination or mistakes, but the DNA, the records, and the careful investigation left no room for doubt. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges. The weight of decades-long suffering and pursuit of truth culminated in one moment: justice. The sentencing brought tears, not only for Neha's family but for the entire community. Rajiv was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time in 20 years, Neha's name was spoken with honor and remembrance, not fear and uncertainty. The case inspired others. Cold case units across the state saw the power of modern forensic science combined with relentless dedication. Families waiting for answers found renewed hope. And for Neha's family, the journey, though painful, became a story of courage, patience, and justice. Detective Ravi reflected, "No case is truly unsolvable. Sometimes justice takes time, but truth always finds a way." Neha's story, once shrouded in darkness, now stood as a beacon, a reminder that persistence, science, and compassion could finally bring peace to hearts that had waited too long. The memory of Neha Sharma lived on, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, hope, and the triumph of justice over decades of silence. Neha's story reminds us that no case is ever truly forgotten. Even after decades, justice can prevail when science, determination, and the human spirit refuse to give up. Her memory lives on, not only in the hearts of her family, but in the lessons her story teaches all of us. That hope, persistence, and truth are stronger than time itself. If Neha's journey touched you, remember that every share, every conversation, and every awareness helps families waiting for answers. You can make a difference by keeping these stories alive. Subscribe to this channel to follow more real-life cases, cold case investigations, and stories of justice finally served. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and share this video with someone who believes that no one should be beyond the reach of justice. Together, we can honor the victims, support the families, and ensure that truth always finds its way.